Hello, how are we doing? We are listening to the Sniff Session with your host, Valerie, the niche sampler. This week, I was sticking to my creature comforts, if I'm honest. I wasn't wearing a lot of new things, but I was reflecting on the future. And it's kind of tough to think about the future when you are in a reality where there's just so much turmoil. And I think that in the perfume talk community, sometimes this turmoil is perpetuated with all of the complaining and like you don't need this, you don't need that, this is overhyped, this is that. No, everybody's right. But I think what frustrated me more was that I'm starting to spiral into this. I was watching some presentations from Fashion Month, and I was looking at everything and nothing is original. And I'm just thinking about all of the permutations one can make in terms of combining aroma chemicals and also in terms of just combining textures and fabrics and shapes. And I saw somebody post, and I realized I'm getting jaded because somebody posted some of the Undermoilemees to show, and I was just thinking, I've seen this before. I'm 30 years old. I'm too young to be seeing trends regurgitate themselves this rapidly. And I know social media is part of it, but you would think that in the fashion realm, there would be a higher demand for novelty and excellence in that way. Because I think if you don't have anything new to say, just don't say anything, right? Especially when you're using up materials and resources. But I digress. I guess that argument could be made for anything, so perhaps I am being a bit too harsh in that regard. But yes, it was a little bit disappointing to see, but in that regard, that also makes me think that there must be so many people who are creating novel things that just aren't getting attention because they didn't gain some notoriety in the 90s or whatever. They're not part of the Antwerp 5 or the steadfast houses that really established themselves post World War II. So there is room for novelty. My current project, even though I've wanted to spend less time on my phone, is really configuring my TikTok FYP to bring about more diverse voices. Everything, like I was complaining about last week, was very Eurocentric, Americentric, but I know that everybody is doing everything that's cool and creative, so I'm just going to find people that have more refreshing perspectives, and that way you don't get bored, you don't complain about things. In fact, there was a little bit of TikTok drama this week, not in Fragcom that I know of, because a person said that they were so bored of the New York influencers because they're all doing the same things. And of course, the reason for that on that person's end was because they were following just the same people that everybody follows, the same phenotype, the same demographic. And if everybody's the same, which is the successful formula, unfortunately, that's why you're bored. If you follow more diverse voices and perspectives, you might gain more interest. And I'm really trying to cultivate my social media space to be a source of inspiration, which is why I actually am going back to Tumblr and Pinterest more these days. I wrote in my diary out of frustration the other day that all you have to do is enjoy the process, and you just have to muster at least a sketch a day, and you can do whatever you want. Because I saw that Adrian Brody, who recently won an Oscar for his performance in The Brutalist, is also a visual artist. And when I look at the art that he makes, quote unquote, it looks very derivative. It's very much Andy Warhol 1960s pop art, that kind of graphic poster art stuff that's not really saying much. But, maybe it's saying a lot to him. Maybe that's his thing, or maybe that in itself is a performance. Who knows? It just didn't move me, the art itself. So I can be doing stuff. I can sketch things. I can experiment and try things out. Of course, by the time you're listening to this, you might have clicked as to why last week when I opened up my Kayali Fleur Majesty, I paused a little bit when saying something, because I was part of one of the social media campaign pieces and being the voice behind one of their pieces. That's my first part, my first commissioned like voice work, which is exciting, and I hope to be able to do more projects like that in future. And it was really hilarious how I managed it, because this little 30 € mic is the same mic that I used in that recording, and I was sitting inside my wardrobe so I could mute background sounds early in the morning, trying to get this correct so that they could approve it on time. And I didn't know if it was going to come up, and it did, and I'm very excited about that. And thank you to everybody who tagged me and said congratulations. I was really excited about that, and that was so cool. And I'm in a bit of a slump at the moment, but that really helped lift my spirit. But what I've been wearing is the same old, and I decided this week to just tell you about things that came in. Today specifically, I'm wearing a little bit of, on my skin actually, is Touche Finale by Jovoy, who I met thanks to Ale, who introduced us to one of the marketing directors. And this is something that my friend Ellie had spoken of a lot. And this is such a beautiful purple floral. It's got, actually, you don't even know the notes. I'm assuming there's iris. This sounds something like lilac, feels like it's in here. A little bit powdery, but it's more like fresh spring blossoms. This does remind me a little bit of Lila Exquis by Jacques Vath, but I'm going to go through this 15 ml very quickly. But as far as spring fragrances go, this is something that is so lovely and delightful. And it feels like classic, chic, luxurious perfumery, and I really appreciate that. There's also a conversation going on, speaking of complaining, about the industry and how overwhelming it is and how there's too much and there's too much to follow. And it's true, we are being bombarded a lot. But I think that sometimes we are a little bit... what's the word? I feel like sometimes we act as though we are parents or guides in consumption, but at the end of the day, as content creators or influencers, we're just influencers. And if you're influenced by something, that is also partially your choice to enact the influence, right? Nobody's forcing you to pull out your wallet and have every fragrance. I don't think you need anything. If you already have a perfume, you should probably scroll past. But I have encountered a few things that I think are really lovely, that if you already have these things fulfilled in your collection, you don't need. But Touche Finale is something that, as a lovely, delicate floral, I think is really lovely. Excuse the sirens in the background. And then in that same week, a lot of PR came through, which is not very usual for me. First, we had Ormonde sending over Ambre Royale, which is one of my favorite. It is the favorite from Ormonde. Again, this is quite a heavy fragrance, but I think the effect is light. This is an amber that is musky and also floral. And it doesn't feel like the dense ambers that we typically encounter. So I typically find ambers either are accented with spices, à la Ambre chromatique or Supermassive by Maison Révélée and Les Eaux Primordiales respectively. Or they become almost vintage ambers where they're accented with more powdery notes and more vanillic. So you have the Shalimar-esque amber a la Shalimar or Grand Soir or other fragrances of that ilk. And this amber feels as though it's the modern amber, which is the amber we're all encountering in the Ambrox families. I've realized that a lot of people hate amberwoods and ambroxan, and I actually quite enjoy it, or enjoy many formulae where it's a principal component, and I like that in Ambre Royale. I think that sometimes you just have to dose it correctly, because this is definitely a 1-2 spray kind of fragrance, which is perfect because I like it a lot, and that means it'll last me quite a while. And then I spoke in my love letters from Milan about the encounter with Gritti and Michela, who is a creative director, I don't know, she's just very important in the company, with Gritti and Gleam, which is a sister company founded by Luca Gritti's daughter. And there we encountered the four new fragrances, but I fell in love with this one, which I received in the mail, which is Pomelo Assoluto, which we'll talk about very soon. And then there's also the upcoming Vanilla Tana, which is beautiful, excellent, love it. And also Muscaria, which is fantastic. I have a travel size of that and I reach for it every now and again, and it's perfect. I also encountered, and I'm sure I spoke about this last week, Scottatura. And this is the new fragrance in the Gleam collection. There's a new line coming out. First of all, follow their TikTok account. I really love it. It's storytelling in the old, like 60s film-esque kind of way. I really love that aesthetic. It is an Italian brand, so if you don't see a lot of diversity, that's why. But Scottatura is talking about almost having a sunburn, or something to ease a sunburn, if I understand correctly. So this has aquatic notes to evoke the seaside where you've been sunbathing, but also has like green tea and fresh notes, but also has an aloe note. So this is watery, but also somewhat floral in that chic 90s way, and a little bit soapy and spa-like. This is so beautiful. This is the kind of fragrance that is going to get lost in the crowd, but so many people would love it. And I think that fresh, clean, slightly, not even aromatic, just slightly green in a cucumber water kind of way, people would love that. And I think that this is something I'm going to rave about all summer long, alongside whatever musk becomes my summer musk. Although I still have a lot of Hearsay 03, so I'm going to wear that. So Gleam Scottatura is going to probably be my summer darling, alongside Pomelo Assoluto, which on paper is not my type. It has not only like 3 or 4 different kinds of citruses and is very citrus heavy, it also has marine notes, like salty marine notes a la Cologne. But somehow in this formulation, maybe it's because of the X-ray concentration, I really like this. This does have cardamom in there, which usually sells me. And the current note profile says it has green tea, but when we were chatting, I believe it is actually black tea. They swapped out the green tea for black tea. And I think that's what makes me like it more, because I find black tea notes to be a little bit more astringent and also slightly deeper or woodier. Don't know what that's about, but I really, really, really love this, and I'm also excited to wear this. I think like when it's searing hot, I probably will go for musks and Scottatura, but on normal, bearable 25, 27 degree summer days, Pomelo Assoluto is going to be my fighter. And because of these beautiful, excellent fragrances that I have in my collection, because of this platform we've built together, for which I'm very grateful, I think I'm finally like satisfied in terms of all the fragrances I have. There's only one fragrance that's fully on my wish list, but everything else I'm like, okay, I'm cool on that. I'm happy to try new things, but I'm cool on that hedonistic consumption, that hedonistic desire to have more and more fragrances, which is a peaceful place in which to reside. I also received PR. I was gonna like email them and ask them to give me back, to refund me the import duties, because it was almost $40. It was $40. I was like, no, Björk and berries, you sent me one fragrance. I'm not going to pay $40 for this, for something that I don't know if I like. But having smelled everything that actually came in there, I was like, okay, I understand the import fee now, but second, I don't mind paying that $40 for what came in. And what they sent is Vanilla Veil, which is their new vanilla. I love vanilla, so I'll always appreciate a vanilla. Of course, I did a long series on vanillas last year and the year before, and this is not something that I would say is a must-have fantastic vanilla. What I will say, that Vanilla Veil reminds me a lot of Bon Parfumeur 402, except this one is more caramelized and 402 is more creamy and woody, but this still has that woody dry base and then literally a veil of vanilla on top of it that almost has a fruity nuance, because they use a really juicy mandarin with it. It's sweet, it's caramelized, it smells really good though. It's a fantastic vanilla, but I think that this family of vanilla exists. This is Vanille des Afriques by Ormonde, like I said, 402 by Bon Parfumeur, that dry vanilla with that dry woody base or textured base alongside the vanilla. This is a family that exists. This is part of that family. This is a good option. It's not too super expensive if I understand the price point correctly, like around 120, 130 euros. So it's decent. They call themselves a Swedish eco-luxury brand, and I don't know what that means, but I do understand the concept of eco-luxury, but I don't understand what that means in terms of their brand and what their practices are. But when I hear the word luxury, which we'll start to yap about in a minute, I'm about to go on a tangent, I wonder what the opposite of luxury is. Because when you look at the actual bottle design, it's quite pretty, but there is no covering where you see the clamp for the spout, for the atomizer. And more so, the atomizer kind of sucks. It kind of squirts out depending on what it is. So there might be some QC issues there. But alongside Vanilla Veil, also a little bit chocolatey. It's not super, super sweet. Sorry, just because I've sprayed it now. Alongside Vanilla Veil, they sent Ross and a Discovery set. I can see the style of perfumery to me. Now, they by no means overlap, but it's the same style of perfumery you see in brands like Lys. So if you are not a fan of that style of perfumery, you probably won't be a fan of this brand, although not everything is like that. I also appreciate that they offer travel sprays and oil roll-ons, which is really handy. But they sent alongside Vanilla Veil, finally, she gets to the point, Ross. Now this I really like. And when I first smelled it, I thought, oh, this is a lovely musky rose. But the more I've been wearing it, and this also might just be my changing olfactive receptors, the more I realize that Juliet has a gun, not a perfume, with a clean rose note on top of it. So it almost becomes like so to me, Ambrox and Cetilox, whatever it is, can have a little bit of a citrusy quality sometimes. So to me, sometimes it's either very citrusy or it's just laundry-like. I'm in the phase of my life where I find it to be slightly sharp in a citrus way. And Ross feels like not a perfume with a rose note, so it's kind of light and fresh and musky. It's kind of a clean, crisp, less luscious version of something like Exalté by Fumi Monet. So I think for non-rose lovers, Rose is fantastic. But if you have black musks by Maison Alexandre J, which I do have, it's quite similar. It's along that vein of things. So yeah, those are the things that have been coming in and what I've been wearing and enjoying. And yeah, speaking about luxury and also reflecting on life and what my future looks like, I know for sure that my decisions are definitely going to be economically driven, because while I definitely see and oppose all of the facets of capitalism that result in human suffering and are unnecessary, as somebody who already exists in a phenotype that isn't necessarily an advantage in this world, no matter where you are in the world, as much as I don't like the game of capitalism, I don't want to lose. Like, I don't necessarily want to be a billionaire who's like exploiting people, but I want to live a good life, and I don't want to be restricted on the basis of not having access to things because I'm poor, basically. For instance, I mean, fragrance is one of those things. I mean, I'm very fortunate. If I just imagine the other day, my sister and I were chatting, and she's like, oh, how much money do you think that tray of fragrance I can see is worth? And I looked at it and I was like, a lot of money. Like, could feed me for a couple months money. And all of that is just due to this platform. But I just want to be able to experience more of the world, which unfortunately requires access to the human tokens, which is money. So when I think about luxury, I think about what the opposite of luxury is. Is luxury based on solely economic and capital factors? Is it a price point? Is luxury an experience, and what is that experience, and who determines that experience? because a lot of this was driven by the definitions we put in fragrance, which no longer really makes sense, I guess, and everybody's kind of operating under their own definitions. And on one hand, I don't think it's important too much, because I think if you just know the difference between something that you can buy for $10 and something that's designer and something that's more expensive, then you know exactly what you're expecting to pay. And sometimes you can expect what to smell. But overall, the lines have been blurred. I definitely see artisanal and indie brands as their own thing, and the ultra niche brands as their own thing. But even within that space, certain brands are luxury for sure, and the two headliner brands that I'll talk about today are that. But there are also brands within those that are just edgy, and I wouldn't call that luxury. I would call that just avant-garde and artistic. But why would that not be luxury? What is the opposite of luxury? Did I Google that? No, I didn't. I could have, but I think that it's more fun to have that open dialogue. So if you have thoughts on that, I'd love to hear them. And also as a consumer, what defines luxury for you? So for me, as fragrance goes, I think a luxury fragrance is going to have interesting, luxurious packaging that I'm happy to have on my mantle. I think luxury is going to be at a specific price point, right? Like Ormonde Jayne is undeniably a luxury brand. And while they do have some fragrances that are quite conventional, there are also many fragrances they have that are really intriguing and very like consumer friendly, really likable and palatable and mass marketable, but they're not something that everybody's going to seek. Like not everybody's going to want to smell like Chi Intensiva, which is one of my other favorites, which is a tea-like fragrance with some aromatic facets and slightly powdery. Not everybody wants to smell like that, but it is an option that exists because this luxury house decided to invest in that profile. So I think luxury has to bring a good tactile experience. Like I want a great atomizer, I want a beautiful bottle, I also want some interesting scent profiles, and then beyond that, I guess, an interesting bottle, and I expect it to be somewhat expensive. So then would a brand like Bon Perfumer be luxury? No, but it would be fine fragrance. So then we think, what are the definitions again? So in my mind, we have artisanal, we have mass market, and mass market would contain designer and like drugstore fragrances. And then we have fine fragrance, and fine fragrance can include niche or just masstige. And masstige is just prestigious perfumery or fine fragrance that is for the mass market, because it's also like designer private lines. And then niche as a whole would be somewhere in between fine fragrance and artisanal fragrances. And I think that's what makes sense in my mind, but I don't know. I'm not anybody's god, so you tell me if that makes sense. I think that despite these definitions no longer being very clear, I think it's the industry itself has made it quite easy to find something that is suitable for your needs. And I think that even the attachment of a label isn't really necessary, because that value judgment at the end of the day has to just come from your experience with the scent. And I think that we need to move towards more experiential scent shopping and storytelling and with fragrance as well. That's why I think, while I love vanilla fragrances, especially spiced almond is fabulous because this does kind of do that, I need to feel some kind of story. I think there's a lot of perfumery that is just a smell, but I like perfumery that travels somewhere. I think if I have to describe something just based on like things that are familiar to you, and I can't describe it based on an experience that I've had that this fragrance evokes, then I think that that's less interesting. But again, my nose likes what it's like. So sometimes I am going to just smell like an approximate balm, and sometimes I'm going to smell like a late summer in Italy. You know, I contain multitudes. And now I think I might as well move on to the headliners of the show, which are Hunayn, which was started and launched last year by perfumer Adil Ali, who, if you are familiar with, if that rings a bell, first of all, you are really into the niche world, but you might have heard of him because he was the perfumer behind Terra by Gigida last year, and he's also been working on his own stuff. He has Somali Kenyan origin. I've sprayed them on my blotter, and I have 5 fragrances from his collection. And what I noticed on the website is that the fragrances are quite pricey, but when you smell the fragrances, you can see why. This is the real McCoy. I don't know where that phrase comes from, but it's the real McCoy. He's using a lot of naturals. He's using generous amounts of oud. The packaging itself on the fragrances in the Discovery set is simple yet elegant, but this is not a Lattafa collection, okay? This is somebody who's looking into quality materials and formulating new stories from it. And another reason why I picked these 2 houses, the other one being Jazmin Saraï, is that I wanted to look into non-Western perspectives in perfumery. And so yes, let's go through it. The first one we have is Silk Dunes. I didn't want to put this one first because this is actually my favorite one. This is a spiced rose. So when you have rose materials, right, a lot of times I find rose to smell like magazines in certain formulae. Like, that's why I don't like Delina, because it smells like magazines. And unfortunately, the new Kaoli is smelling like magazines to me lately, because it's just so powerful. But if you've ever smelled like a rose bush in the wild, and when you smell a rose, you smell that you're smelling a flower, and then there's that rosiness, that aspect that makes it a rose that you're smelling, right? And this takes that rosiness and puts it into the formula. And the way it's behaving, I feel like it's a little bit more jammy, so it's probably like a damask rose. See, this is why people say I'm pretentious. But this is, like, I remember when I went to that Lancôme workshop, we smelled damask rose or Turkish rose compared to rose centifolia, which, by the way, are not the only 2 roses that exist, but these are the widely used ones in perfumery. And centifolia seemed to me a bit more citric and fruity, and damask was more jammy and rosy and deep. And this one feels more jammy, rosy, and deep. That's why I'm saying it's probably damask, but I could be wrong. I'm just telling you what I'm smelling because I like to do these unfettered by the actual scent pyramid. And then you've got spices. I'm primarily picking up something that's more clovey. It's just beautiful. I think this is probably one of the more mass appealing ones, but this is a scent that you immediately smell and put on, and you can tell this is just high quality perfumery. There's also more florals in the background, but the rose is center stage. And I'm sure he's got woodiness anchoring the fragrance experience, but I mostly get this spiced rose. It's so beautiful. Like, this is something that I would scent the Bene Gesserit with from June. Okay, that's Silk Dunes. Next is Assoluto. This is jasmine, or a white floral overdose. Lots of indoles in the heart there. But what's interesting about this one is this feels like I'm mostly experiencing that heart of a white floral where you have that highly indole, intense sensation, and I'm feeling less of the petaliness and not even facets of green. This is just a lot of pure jasmine. If you ever want to smell like pure jasmine extract or absolute, this probably is it. Now this is something that I wouldn't wear because I feel like people who love jasmine are hardcore jasmine lovers, and this might be something up their alley. Now I'm second guessing myself. Is it jasmine or is it tuberose? No, I think it's jasmine. I think this much I know. I think they would love that. I think I appreciate when jasmine has more of the other facets towards it. In fact, what I'm finding with the scents, because I have smelled these before, I smelled these a lot last year actually, is that there is like a intensity to it where even though when I first sprayed the blotters there wasn't a lot of there was more of the top notes, exactly what I'm smelling on the blotter is the majority of the scent experience. So there's more of a linearity in these. I think that the olfactive pyramid is broken in these formulations. Now we're smelling Melati Gaharu or Gaham. Oud. This is a serious oud fragrance in that you can smell it's a proper high quality oud from somewhere. It doesn't feel too Eastern to me, but yeah, it's very barnyardy, but it's not fecal like, but it's barnyardy, it's animalic. You get that little bit of a hay aspect to it, but there's some sweetness surrounding it, but it's not in like a sweet vanilla kind of way or a fruity way. It's just like something brightening it up. There's also something that feels medicinal in the background. So if you've ever smelled like a really good quality oud and then you're like, oh wow, it feels like it's exactly that, straight out of the jar with a little bit of something around it. Something, it could be jasmine as well, actually. Yeah, I think now I'm very tempted to actually look it up because I don't want to, it's 11:11, make a wish. I think that it's very interesting. Like, I want to know more about this. Okay, so their creations. This is the signature collection, by the way. So Melati Gaharu, which is very, very pricey. So this is why they're using a lot of real stuff. So the notes are champaca, tuberose. Okay, and there's jasmine, tea absolute, and jasmine absolute. And there's a lot of things I don't know, like rubella, juhi, mogra, absolute, rumotia, mogra, rucus. And then cloam, chassis, aloes wood, and gaharu. I have no idea what that is. Okay, so it's Cambodian oud and Indian oud from Assam. Yay! Yes, and 3 wild Malaysian ouds. So I was completely wrong about not being Eastern. Okay, cool. So I think I'm smelling more of the Indian oud in it because I'm getting that barnyardy aspect. So there's like 3 different ouds, lots of jasmine, and it's a floral oud. That's why I thought it was sweet. Cool. The more you learn, and also turns out my nose is not that wrong. Okay. So that was Melati Gaharu, and then now we're doing Abi Roya. And I think somebody who speaks either like Somali or Arabic must be hilariously laughing at my pronunciation of things, but I did not take the time to Google translate the pronunciation, so please forgive me. This is so interesting. This to me feels like a tea. It's like green and pulpy, but not sharp green. It's not galbanum sharp. It's not even camphorous. It just feels leafy, like a little bit stemmy. But that's why it reminds me of tea, like a green tea or a jasmine tea specifically that's been just like brewed like wet tea leaves almost. This one isn't super high dimensional. It also is quite dry in terms of not being sweet. This is really lovely. This is like a palette cleanser scent. And I love the way he explores different materials. I think this is a beautiful way to get acquainted with different materials. Like, you'll know what a natural XYZ is supposed to smell like. Now I need to look up Abbey Roya. Now that we've cheated and we've opened up the phone, I think it's worth our while to explore. But overall, I think the collection is so strong. I think this is like one of their cheaper fragrances as well. So we've got, it's Lotus. Lotus, Mate, there is Mate, thank goodness. Hay, Blue Lotus, Mimosa, Gardenia, Osmanthus, Grapefruit, Juniper Berry, and White Camphor. So it's like a lot of lotus in there. But to me, I suppose it might be, I should have probably smelled this one first. But I'm not picking up a whole lot of the floral aspects. But maybe lotus isn't meant to be very floral. Maybe I'm biased by the terrestrial florals that I'm used to. So now we're just going to look for Abbey Roya again so I can spray it on myself. Okay, now that I'm getting it fresh out of the sprayer, I'm still getting a lot of greenness. So for me, Mate is kind of, Mate and Hay are forward. This is why I think that the olfactive pyramid is kind of broken in this one. I feel like everything's kind of swirling together. Okay, now that I have it like fresh and wet on skin, I do detect some floral aspects, but I guess I'm here again biased by Western depictions of lotus where it feels more watery. Here I don't get that aquatic aspect, but I am getting a little bit more of that sweet floral nature. Yeah, but this is so lovely. This is like meditative, serene, but it also has a little bit of a mustiness. This is definitely something for people who are not looking for something sweet, but something understated. And this is kind of like a wild child in the collection as a whole. But I really love it because it really stands true to the mission of exploring high quality materials. And finally, this one I specifically left for last for this collection. We're smelling Duty and Death. This is one of their more expensive fragrances in the signature collection. And when you first spray this, you just smell smoke, almost in a barbecue way. And there's like birch and cade is like that pine oil that's also quite smoky smelling. And I just made a video about this for Richard, and it is like all of the animalic aspects of oud have been taken away or are muted out by the smoky notes, but I also see some blooming warmth from spices. There's cinnamon, there's saffron, there's black pepper. There's also a little bit of a medicinal quality in there. And there's a little bit of a sereneness. Again, not too sweet, but there's something that like lifts the darkness. Like it starts off very dark and smoky and almost black, but then you kind of see that it's actually just a really deep color. I don't know what color it would be. I think it would be like a deep green, a deep olive green. There's a little bit of yellow in there. And this one is inspired by, or is supposed to represent war, you know. And honestly, my friend gave me a Quran. I had one from university when we had like Apartheid Week or Israel Apartheid Week, and I did not crack it beyond the first page. So I need to really get back on that. But apparently in the Quran, there is the Battle of Hunayn after the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had conquered Mecca. And then the surrounding tribes that were Arabs that had not yet converted wanted to push them back. And so, yeah, there was a big famous battle. You can read about it on the internet. But yeah, that was kind of the battle that inspired not only the name of this fragrance house, but also that specific fragrance as well. So I'm smiling Abbey Royale again. Yeah, nothing too sweet. Actually, the sweetest one would probably be Silk Dune. I think Silk Dune is my favorite. I really also love Melati Gaharu, only because of just how gorgeous everything works together. Because I think that the indolic aspect of jasmine is also playing with the animalic aspects of the oud. So if you really love those facets in perfumery, you will love that. And yes, I think that this is a fragrance for people who are interested in materials, fragrance brand for people interested in materials and what they really smell like and how they can be used in interesting ways. This is a perfect house for anybody looking for non-Western interpretations of perfumery and non-Western storytelling. It's fantastic. I mean, I think they're based out of the UK, so keep that in mind. So it also means they should be accessible for most people. And they're newly started, so give them grace when it comes to being able to access them from everywhere in the world. But man, that is a treat. That is a treat. Hunayn, thumbs up from me, because I don't do ratings. Okay, next we have something that came all the way from the States by Dana Al-Masri, who is an Egyptian Lebanese perfumer. And Dana came up because I follow Yosh, and Yosh is involved with Scent Festival, and Scent Festival provokes a lot of conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the fragrance space, about the cultural aspects of perfumery, and kind of putting a light on people that aren't your typical perfumer, that aren't legacy perfumers who are the grandson of the person who started the biggest house in perfumery, or children of perfumers, or people who already have an in with the industry. And also they champion, progressive perfumery in terms of language use. In like this, the Ocean Scent Festival were very big drivers, and also Dana, that's how I became aware of her, were also progressive drivers of not using the O word in describing fragrances. Because I think, it's not really a useful descriptive term to describe a fragrance as oriental, but it's also a huge thing that social consciousness needs to move away from, and they are just better descriptors. And I think even just discussing fragrance and I suppose constructing fragrance is interesting, because in this field, in this arena, you want to be able to provoke something in the consumer so that they are interested in the product. But as an artist, which Dana is, you want to be able to also express something. So bridging that gap between expression and evocation is something that's really interesting. And in this collection, which Dana very kindly sent over, Dana explores in her brand, Jazmin Saraï, the interplay between music and fragrance. And there's this discovery set, and each fragrance, bar two, have a song associated with them. So I think I'm going to go through the track list, which comes in the discovery set, and we can go through the scent, the song inspiration, and also the scent itself. So we're going to open up my Spotify, where I'm sure she had already done this, but I had to make a playlist so that I could be able to go through all of the songs with you. So we go to our playlists, go to Jazmin Saraï. The first one on the track list is Otis and Me. And obviously that's inspired by Otis Redding, and specifically cigarettes and coffee. So when I first smell cigarettes and coffee, I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble for this. I smell something very pulpy. And this is likely because there are a lot of spices, and the spices I find can have a nuttiness to them. For me, especially cumin, but that's not necessarily in this fragrance. The note list includes lemon, neroli, arachicord, marine notes. No, I'm reading mare, sorry. Black pepper, cardamom, rose oil, frankincense, coffee grains, and ambrox. And I love cigarettes and coffee, by the way. This feels really comforting, and in some ways a little bit edgy. It feels like the spices aren't here to comfort you. It's kind of an inflammation in the scent. I think that's why I described it as pulpy before, or nutty. This one is really lovely. It has that, you see that the way the rose and cardamom play together adds this little brightening aspect. I love rose and cardamom together. I think it's a beautiful combination. And what Otis and me made me immediately realize is that Dan is working with a lot of naturals, just because of the way things are expressed in the formulae. That's a good one. Next up, we've got Mare, and this one is inspired by Fairuz's Shayef Albert. And when I used to listen to a lot of Fairuz last year because, well, I have a North African friend, she's Egyptian, and her voice just breaks something in you, makes you believe in love. So somebody recommended Mare when I first wanted to, or I expressed an interest. I put out a bat signal for a neroli scent. And neroli comes from the bitter orange tree alongside orange blossom essence. But Mare is not the neroli I'm looking for. Mare is way more than just an orange blossom or neroli fragrance. It's got sharper citruses, this kind of lemony aspect, but there's also fig and marine notes. To me, it feels like the color of the label, which is a dark green color. And honestly, you know me, I struggle with citruses, so this one actually is not my favorite in the collection, because I don't know if it's lemon in particular, which is in here, lemon, neroli, arachicord, marine notes, fig, cedarwood, and cypress. But to me, sometimes they start to smell like household cleaner. And honestly, you can just blame that on the popular fine fragrance creators who make products for the South African market that existed in my youth. But I love the Fairuz song, so that's a plus. Next, we have How You Love on the track list, but I kind of wanted to save this for last. But once again, we're doing this together. This is my favorite fragrance in the collection. I've got two specific favorites. This is one of them. This one's inspired by Sade's It's Only Love That Gets You Through. Sade reminds me of my childhood so much. Not specifically the song, but it feels like the early 2000s and the 90s. I was very much a child there, like a toddler. And there's a little bit of a haze. There's a lot of muted colors, deep browns. But also I feel like when I was a child, things felt so much easier. And I romanticize that. And I think that, yeah. So this one has this really beautiful buttery jasmine, and in a way there are facets of it that remind me of Blondine by Versailles, and that's because of the waxy facets, which I think mirror the buttery facets in Blondine. It also has rose absolute, grapefruit, sandalwood, and musk. And I was like, oh, I love this so much, I love this so much. And I realized, it's in theory not vegan. So I'm just going to enjoy my little sample of it while I can. And then investigate how much I care about bees as a vegan. But again, I don't need more fragrance. So I can just appreciate this for what it is. So yeah, this is really beautiful. A lot of people, when I first showed that the Discovery set had arrived, expressed that this is their favorite. And as expected, this one was even sold out on the website. So yeah, I see why this is a fan favorite. And Sade is about to make us cry, so we better move on. Next, we've got Nar. Now, this is inspired by Hobak Nar. When I first smelled this, I thought to myself, I know this smell. This smells spiced. This smells charred. This smells very yummy. It smelled like a savory snack. And I couldn't quite put my finger on what specifically I was smelling. And then I got that same nuttiness that I found in Otis and Me, so I knew that there were spices involved. But there's like an ember accord, and the embers of course are what's remaining after a fire, so that's why it's getting something charred. And I think combined with the spices, that's why to me it felt very savory and snacky. It's really interesting. So alongside the ember accord and the coriander, specifically for the spice, we've got cedar and guaiac wood. This feels very dark, and it does feel like a savory gourmand, and I think it's unintentionally so. But I think that there's definitely a snack I had in my childhood, like Papa Bites or something, that remind me of the opening of Nar. And the song that you might be hearing in the background is Hobak Nar by Abdel Halim Hafez. Next, we have Neon Graffiti. Now this was exciting, and this is inspired in part by MIA's Sun Showers. So I don't know what Jasmine Dana is using, but I love this. So she's got mango, incense, cedar, mint, cardamom, and jasmine. When I first smelled this, there was something that smelled a little bit urban is the only word I could use, but it was more like a wet concrete kind of smell. That's why it felt urban. Oh, actually, which other scent was that? No, it's coming up. So there is like a very kaleidoscopic sensation to this fragrance. First, you feel the more citrus aspects, like they're just triple citrus and cardamom mixed together. I don't necessarily feel a lot of mintiness in this fragrance, but it's more like a little bit of sometimes mint can be powdery, and I feel like that's kind of what's happening. It's creating an aura. And then there's vibrancy, and I could feel this lime green color, which might have been the mango, but the mango is not like a drippy, juicy mango that we're seeing now in the current perfume zeitgeist. It's more like a hue in the tapestry that is this fragrance. And yeah, this Neon Graffiti is the perfect name for this. It's very vibrant, it's very moving. This is also one of my favorites, but this is probably third place compared to something that's coming up. Next we have, well, first of all, we're at the end of the playlist, but now we have the penultimate fragrance, which is Fayoum. When I saw Fayoum, I was like, what's going on? So again, I'm smelling spices. And then I remember when I first smelled this, I felt like my mouth was drying out because there was something like a clay. Yeah. It felt like earth. I said there's something earthy in here. There's something that triggers the pica, which is a very random fact to share now that I reflect on that. Yeah, it's very dense and earthy, slightly spiced. The notes say that we've got African violet, and again, I think that adds to that concrete nature. Mimosa, bari date, dried fig, palm frond, and Egyptian clay with some jasmine, Egyptian jasmine. Now this is, Fayum to me feels more, everything has so far had kind of a lift, like there was differences in the olfactive story, like things developed. Fayum to me feels more dense than the others, and this is one of the fragrances that isn't very sweet. It's more dry, like in the way that you describe a wine, and it feels like very earthy. And I think the violet leaf adds to that, because I sometimes find violet leaf to be like a vegetal concrete between violet and iris, depending on which kind of form you're using it in. And now we get to my second favorite, which is jazz. Now, I've always been a white floral lover, but in more recent years I've been more particular about the white florals I love. Tuberose, when it's green and clean, I really like, or sometimes slightly sweet but never bubblegummy. Lily is probably my favorite floral that's not necessarily a white floral but can be a white floral. I've recently acquired some freesia, which I will show you. This is my current one of my bouquets at home. I have some freesia from the Netherlands, and I realized I hadn't really smelled any freesia before, and this one is fantastic. And it has this floral nature, and it also has a greenness to it. So all of that to say, I hadn't really paid much attention to the jasmine, because I found jasmines either, sometimes they are really romantic and beautiful, like Lately at 5 by Linen Tutu, or Jasmine Triple X by Ultra Perfumes, which are natural jasmines. But in jazz, Dana has shown off a little bit, I think, where this is just saying, look how good of a perfumer I am. Look at my skill. If you have ever smelled a jasmine properly, like a fresh, real jasmine, in its real context, you're smelling the bloom alongside the leaves. This is that. This is a live jasmine. It's very much alive. When I wrote down my notes in my journal about this, I said, this smells like Jack's hedge in the afternoon. Jack was my neighbor growing up, and he had a hedge, and on top of the hedge there was jasmine. In the morning it was quite dewy and moist, so the jasmine in the morning is a lot different from the afternoon. In the afternoon, where the dew had kind of dissipated and you still had these fresh blooming live jasmines, they're captured in jazz. You have that creamy white floral aspect, and then also the center of the jasmine with slight indoles, but not a lot of them. It's very well balanced. But then you also have a bit of the stem and the leaves that are also coming through. I think jazz uses many different kinds of jasmine extracts to accomplish what we're smelling, and it's fantastic. Jazz is fantastic. This goes to show, I think both of these houses just show that perfumery that is not mainstream, mastige, prestige is also highly skilled and accomplished. And what I appreciate from both of these houses that I've looked at today is that there's a lot of materials that aren't conventionally used in fragrance that have been highlighted. There's like an Egyptian clay accord, all of these different like lotus extracts and tea extracts that Adil used. What a treat. I love this. This was a fantastic sniff session, and I'm really grateful to both brands for sending through these discovery sets. Like I always say, that it's a privilege to be considered somebody whose opinion or whose thoughts are worth hearing from somebody's work. And creative work is the bravest work, because part of it is just critique, right? A lot of it is critique. And I think both of these houses are great. Just to re-echo, top 3 from Jazmin Saraï by Dana Masri are How You Love, Jazz, and Neon Graffiti. And my favorites from Hunayn would be Sand, dunes or silk dunes, and hold on, no, the names are over here. Melati Gaharu and silk dunes specifically. And I mean, but the complete artistry are all fantastic. I mean, these are good fragrances I'd recommend to anybody, but the ones I've highlighted are the ones that I personally would wear. So yes, those are my thoughts. If you've smelled these houses, please share your favorites. Please go follow these brands, these houses on Instagram. I'm going to make a post and tag them. Please, let's get the word out. Let's make people with these perspectives using high quality materials popular. Because I think that the way that the fragrance game is looking at these days, it's houses like these that are going to flourish, because they're bringing about new perspectives and high quality materials, which is all anybody wants when they're paying good money for a fragrance. So yeah, I hope you have a good week. Remember to always sample before you buy, and as always, happy sniffing.